Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Jurriaan Kamer. Jurriaan is a future-oriented organizational change expert and the co-founder of Unblock, a modern management consultancy, and a keynote speaker. He's an author and helps leaders make more impact by eliminating ineffective strategy, pointless meetings, bureaucratic structures, and slow decision-making. He has been in and around the most radical and adaptive organizations globally, including ones without managers and high levels of autonomy. Welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Thank you for having me, Brandi. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I am excited to have you. And as we get started, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what industry buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
Yeah, the word I want to get rid of is the word cascade. And in particular, the strategy cascade or the management cascade. Because the idea that we as leaders can cascade goals, plans is a naive concept. Cascading comes from the idea of a waterfall that flows top to bottom. But the reality is, for new ideas or directions to work, they need to be integrated into everybody's day-to-day rather than cascaded.
Okay, I like that one. I was going to say, that's not one that I use often, so it'll be easy for me to not use that during our conversation, thankfully. Yeah. So now that we've gotten that off our chest, tell me, what brings you to Revenue Rehab today?
Yeah, I'm here to tell marketing and revenue leaders that if you're slow in responding to the market and the market needs, it is useful to inspect how your organization makes decisions and consider ways to accelerate them.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, slow decision making is definitely something that I see happening a lot. And so before we dive into that, I believe in setting intentions. It gives us focus, it gives us purpose, and it also helps our audience to understand what they should expect from our discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope people take away from our conversation?
Yeah, if people take away one thing, and it's captured in a beautiful quote by Maimonides, a rabbi and philosopher who lived in the 11th century, a long time ago. And he said, the risk of a wrong decision is preferable to the terror of indecision. And that's, to me, the core concept that I'd love to talk about today.
I love that. And that is definitely something I am seeing more and more, especially where there are times of uncertainty. So, whether it be uncertainty in the individual company, economic uncertainty, there's so many things that are happening that it seems like a lot of companies would rather just make no decision than risk making a bad decision and being the person that's on the hook for that. So why do you think that is? Like, why do people feel more comfortable just doing nothing? Because doing nothing is a decision.
I think underneath the decision of, it's like you said, doing nothing is a decision in itself. And that, people don't often realize that doing nothing is something that is an action of inaction, right? So, and I think that the reason why people feel comfortable doing that is because there is a potential discomfort of being wrong. And underneath that is a fear of failure and with possible consequences. That's why you see a lot of plans out there that are either pretty fluffy or we don't know what they mean. They're just so generic that you cannot be wrong. It's all about not picking a direction or not explicitly making the trade-offs that you need to make. And that feels good. It feels okay to come out of maybe a leadership offsite and say, you know what, this is what we decide. And then if somebody else looks at it and they're like, I don't know what that means. Like that could mean anything. We're just, it's not really a decision. It's not a choice. It's not cutting away. Decision literally means to cut or to close down. So a decision is only a decision if it leads to some things not happening.
Okay. And so I like to start by grounding in why this matters. So
Mhm.
thinking about, business leaders, like the majority of our audience are leading marketing or leading revenue teams. And what is the impacts? Like, why should we worry about, slow decision making happening in our organizations or within ourselves?
Yeah, especially in marketing and generating revenue, we're dealing with complex circumstances, meaning that it's often impossible to predict precisely what will work and what won't work. So rather than trying to spend time optimizing and analyzing and gathering more information for us to make the specific right choice, it's much better to launch multiple initiatives and to be comfortable experimenting at a small scale to discover and uncover what actually works and what doesn't. So it's shifting away of this idea of we have one shot and we have to get it right, to an idea of we have to launch multiple things, because the only way of knowing how what works and what doesn't work in our market and with our customers is to try things out and to measure the effect of it. And so if you don't do that, the chances of making the wrong decision actually goes up.
Mm. As I say, that is interesting because most people think by not, committing to anything that you can't make a wrong decision. But what I'm hearing is that it can.
Yeah.
Um, so help me to understand, like, how do we get past this as leaders? I know this is an area of expertise for you.
Mhm.
And even thinking about like the fact that you've worked with organizations that don't have managers at all, it's
Uh-huh.
like that brings in a different component that I'll get back to later. But
Yeah,
let's
yeah, yeah.
start with, how do we overcome the challenges with slow decision making?
Yeah, so first of all, it is important to identify that not all decisions are equal. And so often we just apply the same toolkit or the same process to every type of decision. Maybe that looks like somebody makes a PowerPoint deck, then we talk about it, and if not everybody agrees, we postpone it to the next meeting, or we have to go from one management team to another management team to get approval. It could be all sorts of things that is happening, but we don't really think about the difference between different types of decisions. And it was actually Jeff Bezos who articulated this really well. He says we have to get comfortable with distinguishing reversible from irreversible decisions. So if a decision is reversible, you can make it quickly and figure out, was it the right choice, and try something else, rather than trying to analyze it until we have all the information. And it was actually the author of Atomic Habits, James Clear. Sorry, I forgot his name for a second. He had a great way of operationalizing this idea. He said there's actually three types of decisions. There are hats, haircuts, and tattoos. So if you're buying a hat, you can, that decision is not so costly, and you can buy one. And if you don't like it, you can either buy another one or maybe bring it back and get your money back. So it's really an inconsequential decision. You can just try many different things and understand what it is. You don't have to overanalyze and overthink that. The second type of decision is a haircut. So you go take a haircut, and if it's wrong, it's definitely annoying, frustrating, and maybe you feel ashamed or not yourself for a while. But hair usually grows back after a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. You can go and get another haircut, right? So the consequences of that decision, you don't have to live with that for too long. But then the third type of decision is tattoos, and that is a very different ballgame, right? If you get a tattoo, if it's not the right tattoo, you have to probably live with that consequence, with the decision, for a long time. And removing a tattoo is technically reversible, but it's painful and costly. So those types of decisions, you better take more time to understand.
I was gonna say, I like that as a good way of thinking about it. Now, I'd almost argue, as someone who has cut bangs that are too short, I feel like that haircut one is a little more impactful.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But no, seriously, in thinking about our organizations and how we apply this, I do see so often companies treating every decision like a tattoo,
Mhm.
and giving that same level of, analysis and review and
Yeah.
consideration to something that really would fall more in the hat bucket.
Yep.
So can you put this into practical terms for us? So thinking about things that happen in business, what are some of the examples of like haircut and tattoo decisions that we're having to make?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about, so you're asking haircut and tattoo decisions. Yeah, so haircut and tattoos with more consequence is for example mergers and acquisitions, right? So you're gonna buy a new company that's not easily reversible. It has a huge impact. It's similar to a full rebrand. Like technically it's reversible, but it will create a lot of confusion for clients. If you go back, I'm thinking of the Jaguar car manufacturer who has just rebranded and gets a lot of noise from that. Yeah, if they decide, well, the response is not great, maybe we should turn around. Well, instead, what they could have done, instead of doing this big reveal of a campaign that is confusing for people, is they could have made that decision smaller, meaning we can test this rebrand with a lot of clients and just get it multiple ideas out of the door. Instead of picking one thing, just try 5 variations and see how people respond. Same goes when we are selling consulting projects like we do from our work. In sales conversations, we try different methods to see what works and what doesn't convert, rather than trying to align with everyone in our consultancy on the one right way and spending more time delaying that decision. We just go and try multiple things in parallel. So that's one way to get out of this trap.
Okay. And so when it comes down to level of effort, who should be involved, I like to, I lead both operations and marketing, so my brain is always operationalizing things.
Yeah.
So when we think about, in decision making, what that level of effort is and how we guide our teams, is there any advice in, if I'm a leader trying to articulate to those that report to me
Mm-hmm.
where it is and how much effort and what that decision process should look like for those different categories of decisions, what advice should I be giving?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's especially in that dynamic. It's a very common thing that the decisions, they bubble up to the leadership level and the leader level, and you get stuck in a self-reinforcing loop of approval asking and approval giving, which is hard to break, because the moment you continue giving your approval, they'll keep coming back to you to ask for approval, and you just stay busy with that. And as a leader, you want people to take decisions themselves, and you don't want to be involved in everything, especially not the hats and most haircuts, right? You want those decisions to just happen without you. And for that, it is important that you set the boundaries. You have to be explicit in setting the decision rights and decision-making space within people should be able to act autonomously without needing for asking for permission. And one very helpful way that I've learned from W.L. Gore, the makers of guitar strings and Gore-Tex, is the principle of the waterline. Meaning that if you imagine you are all on a ship and something blows up above the waterline, it's annoying. You have to go back to shore and repair the ship, but the ship won't sink, right? But imagine something happening below the waterline. The whole operation might be in trouble, and the whole company might sink, right? So if you're able to clarify where the waterline is for your department, for your company, and say, everything above the waterline, I just expect you to go and do it without overthinking it. That can free up a lot of decision-making speed in your organization. So that could look like anything that doesn't affect more than 100 customers, or anything that, if it blows up, doesn't cost us more than $10,000. You can just do it and knock yourself out, as long as you're transparent and tell people what you're learning. Go and do it.
Yeah, I can remember an example early in my career. I was a marketing manager. It was my first big campaign. And I remember it had a price tag of $75,000, which
Mm-hmm.
at the time was it wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either.
Yeah.
And I just knew this thing was going to be amazing. and it ended up being a total flop.
Uh-huh.
And, being the new person, I was like, oh, I've, my credibility's shot. I'm going to lose my job. Like, all of the
Yeah.
things. And my boss came to me and was like, okay, what'd you learn from that?
Right. Yeah.
And, how do we take what you felt like did work and apply that elsewhere? And how do we
Yeah.
make sure we don't do more of what didn't? And it was a non-issue
Yeah.
because, to that point, it was one of those things that was above the waterline. Like,
Right.
it cost us, it was a lot of effort, but at the end of the day, it, didn't hurt the brand, didn't tank the business,
Yeah.
wasn't, my whole budget. Um, and I do think as leaders, there is like how we respond to those air quotes failures
Yeah.
is important in helping our teams to feel comfortable in, because it goes back to what you said at the beginning. A lot of times people don't want to make decisions because it's that fear
Yeah.
of, fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decision. But if we as leaders help our team be comfortable in that,
Yeah.
I think we then create more leaders who are also comfortable in that. And that just really starts to spread.
Yeah. It creates more innovation because people are able and willing to try more things. It creates more action. It creates more engagement and ownership. It's all about giving people the space to do their jobs and providing the safe boundaries and guardrails, so people are comfortable doing that. And it's really an opportunity to unlock your speed in your team. And I think, like, going back to your example, what I would be thinking is like, maybe next time, how could you take, instead of 75K, you spend 10K to validate one part of the campaign and see if that works. And then you spend another 10K to validate the next idea or a different idea. And I think that's what it is. It's about maybe starting small and making a lot of actual actions and putting stuff out there. So then you can learn what works and what doesn't. So then you can scale up to the big campaign and the big change.
Yeah, I agree there. And so I'd love to hear, what are some of the things that are getting in the way? Like, if I sometimes making change, we don't even realize what's happening in our day to day that actually is hindering us. So when it comes
Yeah.
to making decisions and slow decision making, are there things that we are all likely doing, or,
Yeah.
organizations are doing that are really hindering and not helping us?
Yeah. So one thing that I see a lot is the desire for consensus, or something. My colleague actually calls it an addiction to harmony. We all need to agree before we move forward. It's not everywhere. Sometimes there's an opposite dynamic where the leader just makes all the decisions and everybody else is just following. But I also see on the other end of the spectrum in a lot of leadership teams where, well, before we can move forward, we all need to completely agree. And when we work with leaders, we teach them to step away from that idea of consensus and rather focus on consent, meaning the decision-making space we're in is not, do we all agree, but is a question of, does anybody have an objection, right? If we just move forward, which is a very different thing. It's really about tapping into the range of tolerance of everybody rather than trying to align everybody's opinion into something, which often leads to either mediocre compromises or false commitment, meaning like, I'm saying yes but I actually don't agree, or collusion and those kind of things. So there's dynamics there, human dynamics, where it's difficult sometimes to go against the grain and disagree with each other. And still move forward. And the only way for teams to build that muscle is to create a safe space to have those conversations and to talk about content rather than the person, right? To make it a really not an interpersonal thing, but really just acknowledge that we're disagreeing, and that we can still move forward as long as we agree that it's not sinking the ship, and as long as it's safe enough to try to go forward.
Yeah, and I like that example, because one of the things, like just a very human analogy, going back to the haircut,
Yeah.
that made me think about. So I have adult children now, and I can remember when one of my daughters in her teen years wanted a haircut,
Uh-huh.
and it was like she wanted a cut and a color, and I did not think that it was a great choice.
Uh-huh.
And initially we were a blended family. So it was like her biological mom, me, her dad, and we're all trying to come to consensus
Right.
on if this is a good idea or if, she should have something else. And we couldn't all necessarily agree. And
Right.
it was one of those things that in hindsight, we did spend a lot of time just, as a
Yeah.
parental unit having conversations about this hair choice.
Right.
And in the end, it became one of those, like, whatever, like, do it if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And,
Sick
she
and tired
did
of
it.
discussing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she did it. And, after a few weeks, she was like, I'm really over this. And I'm like, yeah, I told you that's what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, she came up with something else. Like she ended up going shorter and, dyeing it her natural color. And then it was just like over.
Right.
And, so if I just think about that and how much effort went into the time of choosing whether to allow her when this was not anything that was going to harm her,
No.
she wasn't in danger.
No.
It was, it wasn't like there were none of these things. And we spent all this effort and, I'm laughing now because I'm like, this is a perfect example of what happens in business.
Oh, yes.
So often where
Absolutely.
we're debating a thing. And then at the end of the day, it's like, why are we having this conversation?
Right.
Like, and you think about the cost of like all of the people in the conversation for those minutes that we're debating something that really should have just been, here's what I'm planning to do. Does anybody object? Because to your point, that is a very different feeling of, even thinking about that hairstyle, like I didn't agree to it, but had it been positioned of, does anybody object? I probably would have been like, I think this is a bad idea, but whatever.
Exactly.
It really puts you in a different stance. And so, I just definitely had an aha moment there.
That's I really love that example because it's similar to in business, right? You don't want to rob colleagues, children, employees, colleagues from the experience of making the wrong choice so that they grow and learn, right? It's often not helpful to tell someone like you're going to walk into a trap. It's not going to work for you. The only way for them to actually know that that's the case is by letting them bump into the wall, right? So, the fact that your child had that haircut and walked away from it meant that, oh, actually, I don't like this haircut now for the next time. The other thing I really liked about what you said is that it's not only the time that people spend in those meetings discussing and debating these inconsequential things, it's also the compounding cost of indecision and the cost of dragging your feet and just not making the action. And often the problem is those costs are not on the balance sheet, so they're often hidden, but they are very real.
Yeah. And that is one thing, like when I'm going into conversations with clients, that is one way that I help to force people past that stalemate of trying to get consensus.
Mhm.
Because just based on the titles in the room, I'll make a general estimate of salaries. And it's
Right.
like, this conversation has cost you X,
Right.
dollars. Is this worth that? And it never is. Like when
No.
people hear that amount, it's like, oh my God, like, how are we spending that? And it's like, and that's just me estimating what, everyone makes, which is probably underestimating. And usually just that realization of what it's costing shifts everyone's mentality to like, okay, let's make a decision. And you'll have some people be like, you know what, like, I don't agree, but it's not that serious. Like, go ahead. And you can get some of that. I think the one thing that I would ask, because where I see a bit of a counterpoint is I agree that we do have an addiction to harmony and that we do try to seek consensus. But at the same time, there is often a need to have the conversation and at least get close to consensus. And
Hmm.
so sometimes the hard part is, where do you draw that line
Right.
of being able to get collective input to come to a solution based on everyone's perspective, but
Yeah.
not falling into the trap of trying to, get harmony and everyone to agree.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Getting collective input is extremely important to increase the quality of decisions, right? It wouldn't be a good idea if people would just like, whatever, and just move on. If somebody has really helpful information that the proposer doesn't know, they should share it, and you should hear the opinions to make the decision better. I often use a 4-step process for that. That's actually very powerful. It starts with somebody bringing a proposal. And that is often the thing that's also missing. Like, let's discuss this. But if it's much more powerful to say, you know what, this is the thing I'm seeing. This is the proposal of the decision, and I'm going to write it down, and everybody can read it and see it. That's where it starts. So proposal. Step number 2 is clarifying questions. So everybody in the team or in the group can ask questions to understand the proposal, meaning that they have an opportunity to clarify things, to hear more about something that's unclear, to hear more about the rationale of the person proposing it without sharing their opinion yet. So they have to really withhold their opinion in this first round. And then in the second round, you just do one round. Everybody gets one chance to react. And that could mean like, I'm going to just share my opinion. I really don't like that color of haircut. I think you're going to look stupid, whatever it is. That opinion should be there. The most helpful opinions or reactions would be like, well, I would probably change this proposal in this way. And then after that, the proposer has some time to integrate everything they heard. So the things that were unclear, they can clarify them. The things that people reacted to, and he or she can take away the good ideas and update the proposal with that new information to bring a final proposal for consent. And then we just do one round and ask, is this proposal good enough, safe enough to try? Is there any objection or any reasonable? Is there anybody that has a reason why this would cause irreversible harm, so we shouldn't try it? And then you get the consent. So yeah, I like the process of integrating perspectives while still going for consent is a pretty powerful thing.
I really like that. And, I like thinking about it. It is, you're right in that the proposal piece, like coming in, giving people something to react to.
Yeah.
Number one, gets you there faster. But
Yeah.
number two, a lot of times help people think, because when you have something to react to, you're like, oh, I don't like that. And it makes you think about, why don't you like that? What would you like? And
Right.
then you can add value, as opposed to we got to solve this. What ideas does everyone have?
Right.
Because you can spend, forever just ideating on something, when generally there is someone who has the expertise to at least come in with a starting point.
Exactly.
And I wrote that down because I'm going to implement that with my team.
Cool.
We're going through we've already started our fiscal year, but we're still going through some general planning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good way to go through and, help to make those decisions faster, and also still allow everyone to be heard and have their input. Because you're right, we do all have different perspectives that can help influence what the right decision is.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And so one question that I often like to ask as my last question, because there's always I don't know what I don't know. And so is there anything that I haven't thought to ask about that you feel important to share as we try to tackle the challenges with slow decision making in business?
Yeah, what I recommend teams to do is to build in time in their rhythms, in their rituals, in their recurring meetings or offsites, to just take a step back and observe, how are we working together? How are we making decisions together? and identifying opportunities for improvement, meaning improving the system of work rather than just always being in the content. I think that's an opportunity that a lot of leaders and teams just miss because they're just always in execution mode rather than taking the time to reflect and improve.
Awesome. Well, talking about our challenges is just the first step, and nothing changes if nothing changes. And so in traditional therapy, the therapist gives the client some homework. But here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So for those listening who know they've got some challenges with slow decision making, what's the one thing? What is the first action that you recommend that they take to move themselves in the right direction?
Yeah, it's about asking the question, is it safe to try, rather than do we all agree? That's the simple, powerful magic phrase. If you just ask that question a lot more often, you'll identify reversible decisions, you find ways to create action and to overcome the challenges of analysis paralysis.
Perfect. I think that is a great one, is to assess, like, what is the risk? Is this a hat, a haircut, or a tattoo?
There you go. Yeah.
Is a great place to lean in. Well, Jurriaan, I have enjoyed our discussion, but that's our time for today. But before we go, tell our audience how they can connect with you. And I know you've got a new book, so definitely give the shameless plug for the book, and we'll make sure to link to that as well.
Yeah. My new book is titled Unblock, Clear the Way for Results and Develop a Thriving Organization. You can find it on Amazon, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect, I'm there for you.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure to link to your LinkedIn and the book Unblocked. So for anyone who is listening or watching, check the show notes so that you can stay connected with Jurriaan. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brandi. It was a blast.
Awesome. I thank everyone for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed our discussion. I can't believe we're at the end. Until next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.